Hey guys, it's Navinata, No Limit Hold'em, bringing you part 3 of my question and answer video turn series. So in case you haven't seen the first two, I really suggest that you go back and watch the first two, or this probably isn't going to make a lot of sense because I ended up with one video and split it into 3 parts, but if you insist, these are going to be the examples. But really, go back and watch the first two. So yeah, I didn't get a huge response to this, but just because I want to make sure that the people that started watching and watched part 1 and part 2 aren't kind of just left out to dry, give you this last part with examples and whatnot. And you know, it's already done, I've already made it, but guys, if you're just looking at this and you haven't seen the rest of it, give the series a chance. I think it's interesting stuff, and this came directly from students that had questions. So we were talking about the 3 questions we've been addressing. Primarily have been who's got the range advantage, or whose board is it, pre-flop raiser or pre-flop caller, and how does the board stay, how do we figure out what size to make our continuation bets or donk bets, and then based on the texture, like when is the time to raise with a big hand like a set or whatnot. So yeah, so we're gonna pick up with the examples, and we're going to get into 3-bet versus single raise spots, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the video. Thanks for watching. So single raise versus 3-bet pots, ranges can be different, but the stack to pot ratio is the main difference. Yes, ranges are more narrow. Yes, you can do a better job of thinking about specifically what the value targets or bluff targets in your opponent's range would be. Yes, those are true. Yes, your range should be more face up to your opponent. That does mean that sometimes it's a little bit more important to bet your range than to bet your hand. All of those things are true, but mainly the main reason that there is a big strategic difference in how you bet your hands regarding the percent of pot is the stack to pot ratio. That's the main difference. When the stack to pot ratio is low, we're more concerned about like just the frequent strength, or more like we want to flop like top pair and get it in. You know, we're not worried about reverse implied odds. We're not worried about giving our opponent too good of a price to bink a 4-outer and stack us. It doesn't matter that much. So yeah, hopefully this is all coming together pretty good. Let's go through and just look at some of these examples. More than doing like a quiz at the end of this, I want you to just know how you ought to think about these examples. What are the questions you should be asking yourself? So in a heads up sit and go, the button opens to 3 times the big blind off a I think in the first example we'll say, well, we'll just say both of these are 75 big blind stacks to start with. The button opens 3 times the big blind, and the big blind 3 bets to 10 times the big blind, and the button flat calls. If the flop comes Jack of spades, 10 of spades, 8 of clubs, who has, these are the questions you should ask. Who has the nut advantage? Who flops the most frequent strength? And who has initiative? So, which player has the initiative? So what should a C-bet strategy look like? Or if there's a situation here where we might want to have a donk, well, we can't donk, I guess, in this particular situation, but who has the initiative, and how should we formulate our flop betting strategy based on these things? So Jack 10-8, if you've been paying any attention at all, you're going to know that pre-flop caller is going to have a very hard time missing that board. Like, remember, you opened the button and faced the 3-bet and then called. So you didn't fold, and you didn't come back over the top. You probably don't have aces. You probably don't have ace-king. But you could well have Jack 10 suited. You could well have Queen 9 suited. You could probably pre-flop caller here has the nut advantage. Except that if it's part of your strategy to 4-bet pocket jacks, which it may or may not be, you might not have top set, and it could also be part of your strategy to just 4-bet and probably 4-bet get it in. with pocket tens, in which case you don't have the top or middle set, but you're going to have more of the top two huge combo draws. You're going to have, you may be the only player that can have the actual nuts. Certainly, or almost certainly, you'd have pocket eights, and you could have jacks, and you could have tens. So you'll have maybe a nut advantage depending on your strategy. Definitely a frequent strength edge, because you're going to have your probably pocket eights, 10-8 suited, jack 10 suited, jack 8 suited, and you're going to have big draws and combo draws. So the frequent strength advantage goes to pre-flop caller. The nut advantage depends a little bit. It's probably close. So who has the initiative? Well, it depends on the stack sizes, right? What's more important between nut advantage and frequent strength? The stack to pot ratio. So in this case, our stack to pot ratio is shrinking. It's getting kind of small. So it's the player that has the most frequent strength that really has the incentive to bet the flop. So initiative should be shifting over to the player who's in position. And if I'm pre-flop raiser in this spot, I'm making probably a range check. I'm just going to check my entire range. The stack to pot ratio is small enough that I don't need to get 3 bets in necessarily. So even if my opponent checks back, I can still do a lot of work with my top sets and my second sets. And if I've got like pocket aces, I don't really mind putting the money in by going check, call, check, call, check, call. That might be more valuable than betting and getting raised, It might even be more valuable than betting and getting called, betting and getting called, betting and getting called. So I'm perfectly happy if it goes check, check, and I can start betting on the turn, on a lot of turns. So yeah, I'm pretty comfortable checking my range as pre-flop raiser in this spot, and probably pretty comfortable betting my range as pre-flop caller once the action gets checked to me. So that's how you should think of these things. In this other example, same thing, button opens, faces the 3-bet, 75 big blind starting stacks, button calls. The flop is king h3 rainbow. The nut advantage is easy. Pre-flop raiser definitely has the nut advantage. He's got all the pocket kings and all the overpairs. He doesn't, he literally has all of them. The pre-flop caller probably doesn't have any of them, and pre-flop raiser has all of them. Yeah, so he's got all, in both senses of the word. He's got all of the top sets, he's got all of the top pair, top kickers, and he's got all the overpairs. And in a 3-bet pot, starting with 75 big blinds, top pair, top kicker is pretty much the nuts, so that's considered a nut advantage. Pre-flop raiser could have like king 8 suited. Pre-flop caller probably will not. Pre-flop raiser could have like king 3 suited, depending on how he's structuring his 3-bet range. Pre-flop caller probably will not. So pre-flop raiser has more kings for just frequent strength. Pre-flop raiser has more top pair, top kicker plus. So he's got a bigger nut advantage. So he's got nut advantage, he's got frequent strength advantage. It's a smaller stack to pot ratio, and it's a drier board. So who has the initiative is clear, pre-flop raiser. What should we do with our sizing, and what part of our range should we bet? I don't know if I'm going to do, well, okay, I'll do this one for you. Definitely the initiative should be the pre-flop raiser, and the bet strategy should be to bet a wide linear range and use a smaller bet sizing. If you want to make a specifically exploitative adjustment and check your hands like pocket 9s, 10s, jacks, and queens, I can be behind that. I can get behind that if we know something about the way our opponent plays. But I can also get behind betting my entire range in this spot. So if you told me, if we were doing coaching and you told me about this hand and you said, well, I had pocket jacks and I decided to bet because I didn't want to turn my hand face up, and I still thought I could get floated, I thought I could get called by 8x, pocket 9s, pocket 7s maybe, ace 8 suited, 9, 8 suited, 8, 7 suited, So I did think I have some value targets. I thought my opponent could do some bluff raising and floating, and I thought I could call at least a raise on the flop. Then, I basically, just by saying I feel like I have such a huge range advantage that I should be betting my entire range, and I wanted to do that with a 1/3 pot bet, I would be like, congratulations, well done, golf clap, you did it, you got there. Conversely, if you told me, if I was your coach and you were the student, you said, well, I looked at the situation, I thought, my opponent is not that aware, he's not thinking in terms of range advantage, he's not thinking in terms of whether I, as his opponent, should be making range checks and range bets. He's just thinking about his hand strength, his relative hand value, and what my hand looks like based on what line I take. So I thought that by betting my pocket jacks, I'd just be turning them into a bluff, and whatever value I could get by betting my pocket jacks, I could probably get by check calling or by betting the turn when it goes check check. And I wanted to keep my opponent's bluff range intact, and I didn't want to necessarily get myself stacked if I ran into something like a king 10 that would call down for sure, maybe put a raise in at some point, definitely not fold, and that I definitely wasn't going to beat very often. If you said that, you said, well, I just really thought my hand was closer to showdown value than value, which could definitely change on a later street, but I wanted to start with a check. Then I would also give you the golf clap. Now, what happened here? Both of these students took different lines in the same exact situation, but both of their lines made sense because of the way they're thinking. And if you've done any kind of lessons or sessions with me, you know that my emphasis is more about learning how to think about these situations than it is memorizing starting hands by position or memorizing what hands I should bet on what flops. It's more about understanding it, having a good balanced or unbalanced strategy depending on how we ought to be, balanced or imbalanced depending on how good our opponent is, what they're going to catch on to, what they're not going to catch on to. And yeah, as long as you're using the right thought process. Lots of times, lots of strategies have lots of merit, but as long as our thoughts are consistent and congruent, we're going to play good poker by way of making better decisions than our opponents more often. Okay, so under the gun opens 3 times the big blind. It's a full ring game. Action folds to the big blind, who calls. 300 big blinds effective. This is a much different situation, right? So under the gun opens at a full ring game, and especially if we know under the gun is very positionally aware, his range might look like 8s plus, ace queen plus, maybe king queen suited plus and ace jack suited plus, something like that. I mean, if he's very tight from under the gun, or if he has an open limping range from early position and an open raising range, and he tends to open limp his weaker, more speculative type hands, like 7s down, and open raise his bigger things like big broadways and like big ace-x and 8s plus, then he's all over this board. Conversely, the player that's in the big blind misses this a lot. He was getting great incentive to call with a wide range because of how deep he is. He's getting a discount because he only had to put 2 big blinds in to make the call, and there was already his 1 big blind and the small blind was already in, so there was some dead money. He's getting great immediate pot odds to take a look at the flop, and he's got good implied odds with a lot of his range, with 300 big blinds effective. Yeah, he probably doesn't have aces, probably doesn't have ace king, probably doesn't have kings, might have 8s, but this should be pretty easy to figure out, basically. Who has nut advantage, who has frequent strength advantage, who has initiative, and definitely this is pre-flop raiser. We're not going to have a donk strategy if we're pre-flop caller, and we're definitely going to bet, probably we're going to bet our entire range or something like it, or if we're going to use something of a polarized range in this spot, then we're only going to want to bet like good lord, it's hard to say. Like, maybe we'd want to, if we were going to play a polarized range, if we're going to have a polarized betting strategy, we might just want to bet like 2 pair plus, maybe ace queen plus, because we need value targets. We need to be able to bet and get called by worse, and probably we want to be able to start out betting a hand on the flop that we can get called at least 2 streets, or why are we betting the flop? We may as well check that back and look to induce some bluffs on the turn and maybe get some lighter call downs on turns. So yeah, like, if we are going to bet this flop with some hands and check some hands back, which I can be completely on board with, we just have to be very careful about what hands we choose to bet for value, because we just don't have any bluffs, right? Like, we're going to probably want to bet, if we have any suited connectors, we're going to bet those as a bluff. If we have some 8x, we're probably going to bet those as a bluff. And I would say we probably want to bet like pocket 7s, pocket 9s, maybe hands as strong as pocket 10s as a bluff. And then like just check back our jacks, queens, and king x, maybe our weakest aces if we have ace 10 suited maybe. So like, this is another thing, hopefully you caught that. When you're having such a hard time deciding what hands you're going to bluff with and what hands you're going to value bet, and the two start to merge into each other, and it really just has you ending up checking back like 3 hands, then number one, it's really not clear when you bet pocket 10s whether you're value betting or bluffing. When you bet king whatever, if you bet king whatever, it's not that clear whether you'd be betting for value or betting as a bluff. So you might just want to bet your entire range, because if you do check back, if your opponent's a thinking player, they're going to be like, oh, cool, so he has jacks, queens, or some kind of like king X hand, right? You don't want to turn your hand face up, and there's just not that many hands that want to check back. It's hard to discern it's hard to say where the bluffing hands end and where the value hands begin. And so in a spot like that, it can make a lot more sense to make a range bet, but use a tiny bet. Like if you're betting every hand in your range, bet like 1/4 pot, something like that. It's a dry board. Your opponent's going to hate to have to fold to a 1/4 pot bet. And if they have a hand that has anything on this flop, they're probably not going to want to fold. They probably should fold, since you can never be bluffing. Not really, So yeah, our bet strategy should be like very staunchly and starkly polarized, or just make a range bet. And if we're polarizing, we should bet a little bit bigger, but geez, like it's going to be hard to find a lot of value betting even pocket aces very big, and it's not probably going to be real necessary to bet big when we have something like, I don't know, if we open 9-8 suited from under the gun occasionally, and this just happens to be one of the times we did. I don't know how we're going to feel about piling in a bunch of money because we're using a polarized range. It's hard to polarize here. When it's hard to polarize, probably should tend to be more linear. Again, I could see arguments, I could hear 2 strategies, they could be different from each other, different than the strategy that I would use, but as long as they make sense, that's when you get the golf clap, right? That's all we're really concerned about. And it should be very easy to see that Jack 9-8 two-tone is pretty well the exact opposite, right? Now, the big blind never misses this flop. He's got probably all of his queen jack. He's got 9-8, jack 9, jack 8 suited. He's got 7-10 suited, or 10-7 suited. Maybe king queen, he might 3-bet that, but probably not versus under the gun. Probably he just calls. So yeah, like king 10, queen 10. He's just going to be all over this. He may not have top set. He might 3-bet that, but he'll probably have bottom set and probably second set. He'll have a ton of draws, a ton of combo draws, a ton of overcard plus flush draw, overcard plus straight draw, overcard plus straight flush draw, 2 overcards with a straight flush draw. So yeah, it should be pretty easy to see. If you're ever going to have a donk leading strategy, this would be the kind of board that you'd want to do that with. Moving right along, now I'm just going to give you these and you can work this stuff out on your own. Cutoff opens, button 3 bets, you're playing 6 max. It was a 9 times the big blind 3 bet off of a 100 big blind effective stack. Cutoff calls. Here's your homework. How are we looking at ace 7-5 rainbow, king queen 3 rainbow, ace 3-3 rainbow, and 6-4 deuce rainbow? Pause it, write them down, do the homework, send it in the comments, email me, text me, ask me questions. Let's get involved. I'm interested. I want to help you. Let me do that. So in conclusion, SPR, the bigger the SPR, the bigger the bet sizing. Equity distributions matter. They're everything we're talking about. Range advantage equals initiative. Linear and wide equals small bets. Polarized range equals big bets. Static, volatile, well, the more volatile, more equity, more percent of pot wagered. Right? Makes sense. And remember that it is safer to wait for the next street when the board's static, if you're thinking about raising a set, right? Or even the nuts, or some kind of nutted value hand. And you have more need to raise sets in nutted value hands when your opponent can have more draws, and you've got more reason to raise and become very aggressive with nutted value hands when you can have more draws, because you'll have more very good bluffing hands, semi-bluffing hands to use to balance your big value hands. So hopefully we learned something. Yeah, so Navinad on No Limit Hold'em, over and out. Good. Quote, Luck, end quote.